more downtime. Simply pre-record your video, edit any flaws, then upload. OneStream will transcode, process, and live stream it for you. Create a free OneStream account and start live streaming across social media today.
Hey, what's up guys? Parker Welbeck here with FullTimeFilmmaker.com, and today my team and I are going to be giving you our on the big screens. So first, I'm going to be showing you some side-by-side footage, have you vote on your favorite, then we'll break down the differences between the two systems and the images they produce. Check it out.
Even close. No. But I think we went.
Now, my initial reaction to the footage itself is that the Blackmagic holds up super well to the Red, and given the price difference, that's really quite impressive, as it comes in at just $2,500 for the body only. Be aware though, you should plan on spending an additional $1,000 to $2,000 on other accessories to get it up and running, like multiple batteries, multiple memory cards, etc., while the Red, with all of its accessories, comes out to more around $50,000. So that's the main advantage to the Blackmagic, is that it's about 20 times cheaper. But let's see how well it stacks up in other categories to see if you get what you pay for, or if this is a diamond in the rough.
First, let's talk about size and portability. There's no question that the Blackmagic is obviously the smaller of the two, coming in at just 2 pounds for the body only, and the Red at 5 pounds body only, which is a reason why we don't choose the Red for some run and gun shoots, because the sheer weight and size. So another point to the Blackmagic.
Alright, now let's talk about build quality. Immediately after opening the box of the Blackmagic and picking it up for the first time, we noticed that it feels quite a bit different than any of our other professional cameras. Now, the plastic on the body camera feels cheap, but it's actually made out of a carbon fiber material, so it's technically a lot stronger than most standard plastic. Our friend Kyle, who uses Blackmagic as his main camera, says that he's dropped it several times, but it's managed to survive with no cracks or damage to the internal components. The Red, on the other hand, is made of solid magnesium, so it's extremely durable, but probably best not to drop it still. Now, all the components that Red makes are professional grade, so they're built to last, whereas the Blackmagic is geared towards more of the prosumer market, where plastic is perfectly acceptable. Now, we recommend getting a camera cage for the Blackmagic if you end up picking one up, so we'll link that below, but as a standalone system, the Red has much better build quality, as it should, for the price.
Next up is battery life. Our team prefers to shoot on Canon cameras, so it was a pleasant surprise that the Blackmagic actually allows you to use Canon LPE6, but not even sure why Blackmagic made that their standard battery. So Red wins this category.
Now onto the LCD screens. We found the large 5-inch 1080p screen to be the most attractive part of the Blackmagic. Keep in mind that if you want to get the most accurate display of colors, we recommend purchasing a color accurate external monitor such as the small HD Focus or the Atomos Ninja V. On the Red, we have the external 7-inch Red touchscreen that costs more than the Blackmagic camera itself. It is bigger and the colors are way more accurate in our opinion. So Red wins this one, as they should, but we still love the nice big built-in display on the Pocket 6K.
Alright, up next is ease of use. Now, if you're more familiar with DSLRs rather than bulky cinema cameras like we are, both the Blackmagic and the Red seem pretty intimidating when you first start to operate them. But we found that the on-screen controls, as well as the physical buttons that adjust settings on the Blackmagic, are a bit more intuitive than the Red. Now, the Blackmagic is geared for the prosumer market, so I think they purposely made it a little bit less intimidating and more welcoming than other cinema cameras. Now, Red also offers a week-long training that you can attend to be able to understand all the controls and functionalities of their cameras, which shows that there's a bit more of a learning curve with the Red. So that being said, the Blackmagic takes the win for this category.
Next category is the lens mount options. We were stoked to find out that the Blackmagic will be using the Canon EF mount on the new Pocket 6K. So for our team as Canon users, that's a huge plus because all of our lenses are interchangeable. However, if you shoot primarily with Sony lenses, for example, the Canon EF mount probably isn't that exciting. Obviously, there's third-party adapters that you can look into, but that will affect the performance and may add some more complications to using the Blackmagic camera. Whereas on the Red, you can configure your camera to have a specific lens mount, such as what we have, the Canon EF, or you can also have a PL mount or other mounts as well. Each of these mounts is going to cost $1,000 plus though, so it's a nice option, but expensive. That having been said, for having multiple options, the Red wins this one, but for us personally, since we primarily use Canon lenses, this one's a draw for us.
Since we're on the topic of lenses, let's talk about autofocus. Technically, the Blackmagic does have autofocus, but we don't usually recommend using it since it's fairly slow and unresponsive. We feel like the majority of filmmakers who would be drawn to this camera wouldn't care too much about the autofocus anyway, as it's more of a narrative camera, so it's not a huge drawback, but when filming interviews with an animated subject who moves around a bit, having some sort of an autofocus system comes in handy. The Red, on the other hand, doesn't even bother with autofocus because on large productions, that job is done by a focus puller. So we'll give this one to the Blackmagic because even though it's not that great, at least it's an option and hopefully will continue to improve.
Now onto the main reason we chose to compare these two cameras, the resolution and frame rates. Now the Red camera can shoot 6K at up to 82 frames per second and up to 100 frames if you use a wider 2.4:1 aspect ratio. And the Blackmagic can shoot 6K at up to 50 frames per second and up to 60 frames at the wider aspect ratio. Now either way, the Red can shoot almost 2 times more frames at 6K. For the price though, 50 frames at 6K is crazy impressive for the Blackmagic. As for the quality of the 6K resolution, they are both awesome, but Red wins not only because of the higher frame rates, but also because of the bigger sensor size, which is our next category.
Although they both shoot 6K resolution, the Red has a bigger sensor, so the quality of each pixel is going to be better. The Red has a crop factor of about 1.25, pretty close to full frame, and the Blackmagic has a crop factor of 1.58, which is closer to like an APS-C camera. Keep in mind this is also going to affect your lens choice, as the Blackmagic is going to crop significantly more. For the test footage we showed you, we used a 24mm Sigma on the Blackmagic, making it a 38mm after the crop factor, and we used a 35mm Sigma on the Red, making it around a 43mm after the crop factor. Also, the bigger sensor of the Red is going to give you more shallow depth of field, so point to the Red for having less crop factor, higher quality pixels, and more depth of field.
As for the images each of these cameras produced, both gave us beautiful 6K images. However, a few other things to point out would be firstly dynamic range, or the camera's ability to capture both highlights and shadow detail. The Blackmagic features 13.5 stops of dynamic range, which is the same amount that we have on the 1DX Mark II, but the Red has over 16.5 stops of dynamic range. So as you can see in our tests, the Blackmagic just blows out highlights and crushes shadows a little bit more. So the Red wins this one easily, as it's just going to give you cleaner, more cinematic looking images.
Moving on to our next test is low light performance. Now neither of these cameras are meant to do well in low light, as they are meant to be used on sets with well lit scenes. That having been said, the Blackmagic seemed to do a little bit better in low light as it has dual native ISO, so when filming at 3200 ISO, it produces less noise than the Red would. Red does have a low light specialty camera called the Gemini 5K that would outperform the Blackmagic, but the 6K Dragon wasn't made for low light, so Blackmagic wins this one.
Diving into our next category, let's talk about post workflow and color gradability. If you're using Premiere Pro, you'll be disappointed to hear that the Blackmagic's RAW files can't be imported into Premiere Pro unless you buy the BRAW Studio plugin for $30. So Red definitely has an advantage there, since you can easily import Red files right into Premiere without needing to buy any plugins. As for how smooth the workflow is with both of these files, we color graded both the camera files and edited them without using proxies solely to see how they would hold up against one another. This obviously depends on your computer specs, but editing these at half playback resolution worked out just fine and didn't cause any lagging to occur once we started layering on the color grade. So no winner here, but as for color grading at 6K, both the Red and the Blackmagic have a 12-bit color depth, so they both give you great flexibility for color grading. We were super impressed with Blackmagic and the color science that they've come up with. However, in the editing room, we did feel that Red's footage was easier to manipulate per color and to achieve the look we were going for, while Blackmagic, on the other hand, was a little bit laggy and took twice as long to achieve the same colors we wanted. So we'll give this point to Red, but Blackmagic isn't too far behind.
Next category is codecs and file sizes. After our 2-hour shoot, we had 290 gigabytes of footage from the Blackmagic Blackmagic shooting in RAW and 344 gigabytes of footage from the Red in RAW, so the file sizes between the two don't vary too much. The codecs themselves are just different. Blackmagic does require you to download a $30 plugin in order to edit RAW clips in Premiere, so that's the only drawback there with the codecs. Other than that, I'd say this one is a draw.
Up next is the memory card options for recording. Now the Blackmagic has a couple different ways that you can record and save your footage right out of the box. The most obvious way is by using a CFast 2.0 card and inserting it into the card slot, but be aware that some CFast 2.0 cards aren't fully compatible with this camera. So just make sure that you check the memory card compatibility list that Blackmagic provides so you don't accidentally buy the wrong one. Now Blackmagic also gives you the ability to record directly to an external SSD like the Samsung T5 for example. Now these typically run a lot cheaper than CFast 2.0 cards, so it might be worth checking out. Plus with the external cage that we recommend, you can attach an SSD to keep your setup all together. Now as for the Red, unfortunately you can only record directly to the Red mini mags, which start at $1,500 for less than 500 gigabytes, so it's not nearly as affordable as Blackmagic. The clear winner here is the Blackmagic for having multiple recording options and being a lot cheaper than Red.
Finally, on to our last category is going to be overall image quality. We were honestly blown away with how well the Blackmagic was able to stack up to the Red. It's pretty hard to tell based on our comparison video which image was which, so hats off to Blackmagic for being able to pack a 6K sensor with RAW capabilities into such a small and affordable package. It's no question that the Red is known for its incredible resolution, high dynamic range, frame rates, color depth, and so on. So overall image quality is going to go to Red, but again, we are super impressed with Blackmagic that it was able to keep up as well as it did. Now, our overall thoughts on the Blackmagic 6K Pocket Cinema camera is that it's a great narrative style camera on a budget, but personally we all agreed that none of us would actually use this camera, mostly because none of us really shoot narrative style videos, and for the style of videos we shoot, the 1DX Mark II is much more practical with better battery life, autofocus, easier workflow, better in-camera colors, and so on. So based on all these categories that were important to us, the Red is the clear winner in this shootout, but obviously you're going to pay an insane amount more money, so it's exciting to see a company like Blackmagic pushing the envelope and developing affordable cameras that even come close to a cinema camera. But hopefully this helped you guys get an idea of how good the Blackmagic cinema camera really is, along with some of its limitations to be aware of. Special thanks to Adorama for sending this to us. We've linked in the description where you can buy one for yourself. Also, this comparison was a team effort, so special thanks to Landon and Jake and our buddy Kyle Abbott for doing some research and shooting and editing this video. You can check out more of their work by clicking in the links below. Also, as our team continues to grow, we're going to have more manpower to produce more videos like this, so leave comments for us below letting us know what gear you'd like to see us test out next, or other ideas for content you'd like to see on our channel. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about becoming a master at achieving cinematic shots, as well as how to run your own video production company, you can join our online film school at fulltimefilmmaker.com to see over 300 more tutorials. To see a preview of what the course is like, you can sign up for our free 1-hour filmmaking training by clicking over here. But that's it, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you have any further questions, please let us know.
Hey guys, what's up? So in this video I'm going to answer all of your questions about the Blackmagic's new camera, the Pocket 6K. Now right next to it I've got the Pocket 4K, and the reason is because a lot of the questions you guys sent in to me were in relation to the two. So anyways, let's get started. So the first question, and this is probably the most popular question, has to do with the autofocus. So how is the autofocus? Well, I would pretty much say there is no autofocus in this camera, and this is the same for both of these, for the 4K and the 6K. So if you already know own the 4K, then you know exactly how it is in the 6K, because it's identical. The only difference is that you can do it with obviously Canon EF lenses. But basically the way that it works is you can either press this little button here on the back, which will focus right in the center, or you can, for example, press and hold it here, and it will then focus for you. But yeah, you know, it takes a while. It kind of
This brilliant device stops expensive internet and gives you super fast Wi-Fi anywhere and anytime for a fraction of the cost. It's so simple to use, anyone can do it in less than 60 seconds. You don't need an IT degree to finally have fast Wi-Fi in your house. It was created by two computer scientists that both worked for a large internet provider company. That's where they discovered a dirty secret. Internet providers are deliberately slowing down your internet connection. It's a common trick they use to make you upgrade your plan and pay more money. They usually give you a cheap router that gets slower over time, and it can be a struggle to even watch HD videos on YouTube or Netflix. Two of the company's computer scientists were disgusted by its money-grabbing attitude, and they decided to quit their jobs. Together, they started looking for a way to bypass the speed throttling and solve this problem for good. After months of development and thousands of beta tests, the Range XTD was born. The combination of innovative nanotechnology and advanced computer engineering allowed this small device to drastically improve the Wi-Fi speed and range in any house or office. It can boost your Wi-Fi speed up to 300 megabytes per second, which means you'll be able to surf online and watch videos in high definition. Options. You don't need any technical knowledge to use it. Just plug it into an electrical outlet and it will automatically connect to your router and start working right away. The idea behind this device is brilliant. Without getting much into details, the Range XTD works by blocking your internet data report to your internet provider, which makes it impossible for them to slow down your internet connection. At the same time, the device boosts the speed of your Wi-Fi signal and fixes the Wi-Fi dead spots, so you can surf the web anywhere in your house with full Wi-Fi signal. Here's the Range XTD in action. Before connecting the device, the speed test is showing a really slow internet connection. You'll have a hard time streaming any HD videos with this latency and bandwidth. Now we're unboxing and plugging in the Range XTD. It works right out of the box, without any complicated setups or cables. There's no need to wait or reboot our computer. We're starting the speed test and wow! It shows over 60 megabytes per second, which is over 5 times faster than without the Range XTD. With this internet speed, you can easily watch YouTube and Netflix in HD and surf the web without any interruptions. The possibilities are endless. Whether you are a Netflix fan, working from home, or you just want to watch YouTube videos and browse internet in any corner of your house, the Range XTD will let you enjoy the internet without annoying loading times and buffering issues. The creators of the Range XTD want as many people as possible to know about this new technology, so they did everything to keep the price low and make it affordable for everyone. Range XTD's regular price is $99, but today you can get an exclusive 50% discount and order it for just $49. If you are interested in the Range XTD, or if you want to surprise someone with this unique gift, click on the button on this video to get 50% off your purchase. The founders of Range XTD are so confident of their product, they are offering a 30-day money-back guarantee with no questions asked, which means you can return the product within 30 days for a full refund. This is a great deal, and it might be taken down anytime, so it's best to act now. My advice? Grab yours before this super low price is raised. Click on the link on this video to visit the official website and order with 50% off.
Goes in and out, and it's basically not the fastest way to focus. Now, is it actually accurate? Yes, the autofocus is accurate, but it's something that you probably want to do before you start recording. So just make sure your shot is in focus, then record, because if you're actually gonna do this while you're rolling, then your shot is gonna look horrible, because each time you press the autofocus function, then the camera kind of goes hunting back and forth, and then it finds the right focus spot. And there is no such thing as track focusing or anything like that. Now, I know some people are going to be complaining about that. For me, it's not a problem. For a lot of people who are going to buy this camera for what it's actually meant to be, which is like film work or let's say music videos, they also won't care, because after all, the name of the camera is the Blackmagic Cinema or the Pocket Cinema camera. And cinema stands for the fact that you're always going to be manually focusing. Now the cool thing is that you can actually use the app, the Bluetooth app that allows you to connect to this camera, just like you can to the 4K camera. And through that app, you can actually control the focus of your lens. So you can remotely just basically pull the focus and adjust it that way. Again, it's not out of focus, but the cool thing is, I think that now on for example, you can have this camera just like you could with the 4K. You can put the Pocket 6K on a gimbal, let's say, and then you can have one person operate the gimbal while the other person operates the focus remotely. Now, next question is there any IR pollution problems when using ND filters? I'm sure it's going to be different with different filters. The ones that I'm using, which is the Power XND, those are my favorite variable ND filters that I throw onto these kind of smaller cameras. And that's what I've been using when I was getting all that test footage that I showed in my review of the Pocket 6K. I used that in pretty much all of those shots, and actually in all of those shots, because I was outside and there was a lot of sun. And I never once noticed any problems with IR pollution. Now, if you guys want, I can kind of show you here these quick little comparisons, and you guys can kind of see for yourself how it looks there without the ND and then with the NDs on at various strengths. Now, if you guys want to watch those tests kind of more detail and higher resolution, then as always, head on over to my website, tomantosfilms.com. Over there you can download all of the sample footage from both of these cameras, and you can kind of compare it for yourself. All right, so next question is, can we mount EFS lenses? Yes, you can. I've tested out the Canon EFS 18 to 135 millimeter lens on the Pocket 6K without any problems. It works identical like the Canon EF lenses. The touch to focus function works, the image stabilization, everything is the same, and you can obviously control your aperture. All right, the next question is about the crop factor. So in 1080p or 2.8K, is it cropped? And if so, by how much? It is cropped, so there's different resolutions. If you're shooting in 6K, obviously uses the whole sensor. And 5.7K is going to be cropped. Also, you have 4K, but 4K right now is in ProRes only. And then otherwise, you also have 3.7K anamorphic, which is windowed, and then 2.8K, which is also windowed. And in 1080p, you can actually use the full sensor. So 1080p doesn't have to be cropped. Now, when you're actually in 1080p, but the full sensor, meaning the 6K sensor being downscaled to 1080p, you can do slow motion, but it's basically the same as if you're recording in 6K. So the max frame rate is 50 frames per second. Now, if you change the crop factor to 2.8, basically, so then it's cropping it the same as it would on a 2.8, basically 2.8K resolution, then you can suddenly jump to 120 frames per second in 1080p. And then that maybe will take me to the next question, which is about the different frame rate options. So you basically can record, 24 frames per second. You can actually go down to, you can do time lapse all the way to like 1 frame per second or even slower. But the maximum frame rate is going to be 120 frames per second. And to reach that frame rate, you have to be in 2.8K resolution, which is windowed at that point. That's how you're going to get that speed. Now, there is another another resolution, which is the 5.7K, which I know some people are wondering why would you want that when it's so similar to the 6K? Well, that's because in 5.7K, you can then jump to a higher frame rate, which is 60 frames per second. So 60 frames per second in 5.7K, or you can also do that in 6K, but in the wide aspect ratio, meaning it doesn't record or scan the top or bottom of the sensor. So it's a wider aspect ratio of 2.4 to 1, and that one you can also record up to 60 frames per second. Otherwise, the full 6K sensor readout maximum frame rate is going to be 50 frames per second. The next question here we got is 6K. Is the 6K mode only available in full sensor? Yes, it's only available in full sensor because you cannot basically crop in. It's because basically there's no more photo sites on there. So obviously you can always zoom in afterwards in your own editing software, or you can just simply punch in by using one of the lower resolutions. But otherwise, if you're recording in 6K, it's always going to use the full size or the full super 35mm image sensor. Is there moire? There's every camera is going to have moire. Just I guess a question of just how bad is the moire going to be. On these cameras, actually, whatever it is that they're using in front of the sensor, the filter, the optical low pass filter, it's doing its job. Now it is going to be noticeable in some extreme cases, but like for example, if you look at my tests from the cinema camera shootout, where I compared this camera to the Arri Alexa, Ursa Mini Pro, and the Red Raven, in those tests, at the end of that video, I have more tests, and you can see it's very similar to pretty much identical to Ursa Mini Pro, and I would even say very similar to the Arri. Now some people actually preferred this versus the Arri. Some people prefer the Arri versus this, but I think the difference is very negligible. All right, next question. Are you able to simultaneously record audio from both the mini XLR as well as the mini jack input? And yes, you can. So if you think about that, you can actually record, I guess technically 3 channels, because you can record, obviously the mini XLR is going to be 1 channel only, or mono, but on the 3.5mm jack on the top here, you can record the stereo, so you can have 2 channels there. So you could actually be recording 3 separate microphones at once. And the cool thing is too that, in the audio settings, you can choose, for example, like, on channel 1, which signal you want to get, whether it's from the XLR, 3.5, or maybe even the built-in microphone in the camera. And then on the second channel, you can also, mix and match any of those, or you can just duplicate it and have XLR, let's say, coming into both channels, or vice versa. Now, obviously, if you're going to be recording or try to record those 3 channels, the only problem then is going to be that your 2 channels that are coming in through the 3.5mm jack are going to have to be recorded on either channel 1 or channel 2. So meaning the left and right that's going to be coming in on the mini jack port is going to be then, the audio, I would say the level is, and the audio is going to be mixed down together to one mono signal or 1 channel. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, technically you could even record, like I said, 3 separate microphones. Another question, is the Canon EF mount sturdy? Yes, it's actually very sturdy, because I've been using this, like the first few days that I got it, a lot of the shots I got was on my Tamron 70 to 200mm lens, which is a big and heavy lens. And I had no problems. And then on top of that, I did try using some of the cinema glass, like the Zine or the CP2s from Zeiss on there. And obviously those are big, kind of awkward lenses for such a small camera, but you can mount it, and it's actually very sturdy. Another question is about I guess the medium, the media that you can use with this. Have you found a way to record full 6K 3:1 in RAW, basically, or B-RAW, at 50 frames per second without dropping frames? And yes, I mean, the stuff that I recorded, or majority of it for my review of the camera, was recorded in that. But like I said, it's just sometimes you end up noticing some problems. Like right now, I have the Samsung basically SSD here, the Samsung T5, and I'm set to, let me just double check, yeah, 6K 3:1 compression ratio, and I'm at 50 frames per second, and I hit record, and it is recording. Now, question is, for how long is it going to record? My experience is that once the card is basically above 50%, of the card or the hard drive is above 50% full, that's when you might start noticing problems. And what I mean by that is that it will still allow you to record, but it will sometimes after like a minute, or sometimes after 30 seconds, sometimes after 5 minutes, it almost seems like it just goes all over the place. It will just record, and then will stop recording when it senses the dropped frame. But as you can see right now, I'm still recording. Yeah, it's as you can see, you can definitely record. So this is the Samsung T5, and then I also have these CFast cards that also allow you to do that. So again, like I said, it's just a question of how full is your card or your drive. So I guess if you really want to record a lot of this stuff in that resolution, in that frame rate, then I would say just get the Samsung T5, but get the 1 terabyte drive. This way you'll know you'll have more space, and then you can fill up, like I said, safely up to 0.5 terabyte, it seems like, or 50%. See, now it finally stopped. So it stopped at, was it 2 minutes and 16 seconds. So yeah, 2 minutes and 16 seconds, and that's when it stopped recording. So again, that gives you an idea of what kind of problems you'll have. So if you want to do long takes at that, you know, slow frame rate, then obviously you're going to have some problems. But normally when I'm shooting slow motion, I don't record these crazy long takes, because another thing obviously is, you know, and also on those high compression ratios, because then you're really gonna, right now I'm in 3:1 recording 50 frames per second in 6K, that full 500 gigabyte, I wish it was a terabyte, but it's a 500 gigabyte Samsung T5 gives me 15 minutes of space. So that just shows you how much data that is. So definitely, whenever I record slow motion, I just switch to the lower compression ratios, and then this way I don't have any problems. So if you, for example, drop to 5:1, suddenly you have 30 minutes, almost 30 minutes to record on you know, in slow motion, 50 frames per second on a 500 gigabyte drive. All right, the next question is about slow motion. So I want to see side-by-side footage of the 120 frames per second slow motion in both the 4K and the 6K camera. So here it is. Both cameras, as you can see, obviously they're going to have different crop factors, because they are recording in you know, different sensors, different size sensors, and different lenses. But the 4K, you're cropping in from a 4K sensor into 1080p, whereas on the 6K, you're going from a 6K sensor to 2.8K, so your resolution is much higher. All right, next question is about the rig. So can I use the same rig Pocket 6K camera, or is there a difference in size? So I'm using the same rig right now, actually on this that I had on my 4K on my 6K camera, and as you can see, it definitely does fit. The only thing you got to be aware of, I would say, is that certain rigs, like I think it's a Tilta, that basically they put this weird thing, I don't know why they did that, that sticks out in the front and goes up. And then that rig doesn't fit, because the only difference between these two cameras when it comes to build quality is the mount, or the front of here of where the camera is, just sticks out a little bit more and it's thicker. So if you have anything, whether it's on the top or on the bottom, that goes, basically extends and goes down, or you know, from the top or up from the bottom there, then it's going to go into the mount. But if it's, for example, you see even this small rig cage that I have just goes forward, like it has these little elements for mounting extra things that go forward, that's fine, because this mount never goes past the original 4K body. So what I mean by that is it's not thicker than the body itself. So yes, you definitely can use the same rigs. It just depends which rigs those are. For example, if you watch my updated rig that I've been using with my Pocket 4K, it's actually the identical things now that I'm using for the Pocket 6K. So I got actually the same cage. I just gotta wait for it to be delivered. It's been kind of some delays there, but I end up just getting another of these cages, the same mount for the SSD, everything. So I can use it on both of these cameras. So it works perfectly, and that's one of the reasons why I really love using the smaller rig cage and all those accessories, and the side handle here, which right now I mounted it on the top, but the side handle also holds the SSD in there, and there's a whole bunch of cool things that you can do with this rig. So if you guys are interested, then you can check out my rig in my full review of that rig for the 4K, because it's identical for, you know, for the 6K. And you can see that by, again, following the link in the description of the video, or go to my website. All right, next question is, I want to see night footage on this camera. What I guess what you're saying is, oh, you want to see low light footage, right? So I did do already a comparison in low light, just using a candle with both of these cameras side by side, so you can see that. And as always, like, again, you guys can download all of this raw footage by going to my website. So again, I'll provide the link for that in the description. At the end of the day, if you're wondering basically how the 6K performs in low light, it is pretty much identical to the 4K. And I think the 4K is great, and I think the same thing about the 6K, because again, these are cameras that have dual native ISOs at 400 ISO and at 3200 ISO. And that's the great thing about them, is that you can switch to either. So if you're shooting in low light, switch to 3200 ISO, and you can shoot, you know, and get much better quality image, because again, you're shooting from a native ISO, so there's not as much noise as if you, for example, you're shooting with a camera that has native 800 ISO and then you bump up all the way to 3200. So that's the good thing about it. And safely, I would say you can go up to like 8000 ISO on both of these cameras and it's going to look beautiful and clean. Obviously, you need to have some kind of light in your shot. If your shot is just pure, you know, if you're doing, I don't know, surveillance work or something, hidden camera, then these are probably not the cameras. I mean, these are cinema cameras. So, you know, even a DSLR or DSLM type of camera is not going to be good for that. But for anything where you actually have some light, these cameras are amazing. Like I said, even when it's very dim. All right, next question. Does the 6K fit on the Ronin S, Ronin SC, Moza Air 2 or Crane 3 Lab? Yes, it fits in all those gimbals. Now, another question you should probably ask yourself is what's your rig? Because you see, right now I have the 6K with this, you know, very small and very light 50mm lens from Canon. And with this, it's a nice, light, small setup. If you're going to throw under a crazy long telephoto lens, then obviously some of those gimbals are going to really struggle. I would say the Ronin and the Moza Air 2, and even the Crane 3 Lab, they're going to handle most of what you throw on it. The Ronin SC will not. It will still fit this camera. This camera itself is very light, but again, you got to put a very small lens on there, just maybe the one internal battery and yeah, a CFast card. You don't want to have a you know, a SSD attached to it externally. So that's kind of, I would say, what you should kind of ask yourself is look at the overall weight of your whole rig and then look at the specifications of your gimbal, whether it can handle that weight. Because when it comes to the size of it, yes, it will fit actually on all of those gimbals. So that's the great thing about it. Now with some of those gimbals, you do have to keep in mind that basically I noticed that some of the gimbals, because the camera is so wide, because it's kind of like a DSLR, but even a little bit wider than that because of this big screen. So because of that, some of the gimbals you kind of have to offset the center of the camera a little bit to the left, because otherwise it's going to be getting in the way of the motor. And so I found that with the Moza Air 2 and the DJI Ronin S gimbals, you have to, I mean, you don't have to, because if you have a big lens, then you can put the camera back just enough so it clears the motor. But if you're using a lighter lens, then you're gonna have to push the camera forward, then it's gonna get in the way of the motor, means that then you have to offset it to the right. It's a little like complicated. But anyways, once you have the gimbal and the camera, you'll try it out yourself and you'll see that in some cases you will want to offset it to the left. And you can do that easily now because you can buy these very simple offset plates. There's various companies that make them. I know Moza actually makes, I think, their own. I'm not sure about DJI. But yeah, you can get these offset plates to make sure that you can, you know, offset the camera. And actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the smaller rig, which builds this cage, now also has an offset plate. Now, another way you can kind of get around that is by putting a cage around this camera, because if you have a cage, then you can actually offset it on any gimbal, because like at least with this cage that I have with from SmallRig, this cage has multiple attachments on the bottom, so I can mount it here where the center of the lens, or I can attach my base plate basically to the right or to the left. So that is actually one big advantage again of using this cage. All right, let's jump to the next question. Is there more jello when shooting in 6K? Nope, it's the same. Doesn't matter which resolution or thing you're shooting, because even the ones that are shooting in 6K but downscaling it, they still have to do a full readout of the sensor. And the ones that are shooting basically cropped in, I mean, they don't do the full readout of the sensor, but the section that they read out reads out at the same basically speed. So there is no difference. So when you look at my again my cinema camera tests, you can see there how when I'm panning basically left and right, how the jello looks, or the rolling shutter effect, and it's the same pretty much as the 4K, and also very similar to even like the Ursa Mini Pro or Alexa. All right, another question is, can you use this camera for live streaming for many hours? Yes, you can use it for many hours, because obviously it's a cinema camera, but it also has all these other cool functions that you can use it for. For example, I used it actually for streaming live on YouTube. And the reason is because you can just connect your power cable that comes with the camera, plug it in here, then this way you don't have to worry about battery life. And then on top of that, you can put in an SD card, you can put in a CFast card, and you can put in a hard drive here. So you can have multiple media and you can record to that, you know, for basically a very, very, very long time. So yes, definitely is a camera, I would say, that's good for live events in that sense. Another question is, it's about the adapters for the 6K. So can any other lens be adapted to the EF mount? As far as I know, or at least as far as I've tried, because I think Pentax you can, but anyways, I've tried the Nikon, you know, like the old Nikon or the newer ones, Nikers. You can mount it onto the Canon EF. There's very simple adapters you can find. They're very thin, that still allow you to do that. When it comes to lenses from mirrorless cameras, whether it's Sony or Lumix or whatever, those you will not be able to adapt because of the flange distance. The mirrorless cameras obviously have a much more shorter flange distance. Canon EF has much longer flange distance, and so basically you can't fit it in there physically. All right, next question, is there stabilization? There is no in-body stabilization or basically like a stabilized sensor. Because again, it's a cinema camera, so like the Red cameras or Arri Alexas, whatever, none of them have a stabilized sensor, because as a cinematographer, just trust me, when you're working on films, last thing you want is to have a stabilized sensor. It creates a lot of weird artifacts. But for average video, you know, basically camera, it's a great feature, right? Especially if you're doing vlogging or things like that. Now you can have, obviously, you can have optical stabilization. What I mean by that is, if you buy a lens that is optically stabilized, then you know, Canon EF lens, then this camera will provide power to it. Now, one thing to be aware of is when you're running off of batteries, and I kind of talked about that in my review, is when you're running this camera off of the batteries here, then the image stabilization on your lenses will not be activated until you press record, and then it is fully activated. I'm guessing it has something to do with trying to save the power, since the batteries, you know, kind of don't last very long on these cameras. Now, the second you connect it through the AC plug, then no problem, the image stabilization works whether you're recording or not. All right, next question is, what is the highest usable ISO while still retaining 13 steps of dynamic range? It's going to be the 3200 ISO, and that's because that's the other native ISO. So basically, whenever you want to get the highest dynamic range out of any camera, you always want to be recording in the native ISO. Because anything else, you know, if you go a step up or down from the native ISO, really all you're doing is kind of the same thing as if you were to record your footage in a certain, you know, basically setting, a certain brightness, and then in your computer, you adjust the exposure and then brighten or darken their image there. So you're always going to be losing either the shadows or the highlights. So in this camera, actually, that's the amazing thing, is you can get 13 steps of dynamic range, both in 3200 ISO or in 400. Obviously, the 400 is going to be better in capturing more, you know, steps of light in the higher, or the basically above the midpoint. And in 3200, you're capturing more in the darks, so in the shadow areas or below the midpoint. All right, next question. Are there any overheating problems? Nope. Both of these cameras are, that's the one thing that I really love about them, is that they're built like a proper cinema camera, and they both have nice big vents, and the 6K version actually has even bigger vents here on the top and the bottom, and that's, I guess, because the mount is bigger, so it allows you to have that. But anyways, both of them have great venting and never had any problems. I've been shooting, even today, it's 85 degrees outside, and you know, it's a nice and warm day. But anyways, even with this weather, I've had the cameras on for over an hour now while I was kind of getting ready. No problems. The cameras never shut down on you because of overheating. All right, another question, is the 4K footage from the Pocket 6K sharper than the Pocket 4K? I guess I don't want to be the one to judge, because I'll say something, somebody says, no, you're wrong, whatever. It's a very subjective thing, so I'll let you guys just watch the examples. So here's the 4K footage from the Pocket 4K. And now here is the 4K footage from the 6K camera, which is obviously downrest. So that's how it looks. All right, let's jump to the next question. What are the extra accessories you recommend for the Pocket 6K? Like I mentioned, definitely a cage. It just allows you to mount a lot of things. And I mean, pretty much the exact same accessories that I recommend for the 4K. So again, watch my video about that rig, and then you can kind of see, as you'll notice, I'm putting the exact same things on the 6K. So, but definitely a cage. I think the Samsung SSD is a great way to record, basically have a lot of recording media. The side handle, which right now I mounted on top, but you can put it here on the side, which also protects your SSD drive because you put it there inside. So that's another thing. Another cool thing is this microphone from Asden, which has the mini XLR connection directly, and it's a very good microphone. So you can put that on there and get really good directional audio. So that's another little cool accessory. And I would say pretty much everything that I've had on my Pocket 4K, except obviously without buying the Metabones, because this camera, that Metabone basically won't work on it. All right, next question. Is it worth upgrading from the Pocket 4K to the 6K? I would say don't think in those terms, simply because they're just different cameras in the sense that they both have the great, overall design, nice screens, beautiful recording medium. But obviously the 4K is meant to be used mainly with micro four thirds lenses, and this one is meant to be used with Canon EF glass, and it's also a super 35mm image sensor. So those are the main big things. The resolution itself, for most people, won't matter, and for me, most of the time, it doesn't matter. The fact that this one shoots 6K. When I'm doing visual effects work, yes, then the extra resolution is always helpful. It makes it easier for tracking or stabilizing footage, or for compositing anything in there and things like that. You always have more details, or reframing your shots. But otherwise, I don't care about the extra resolution. What I care about is that this camera allows me to use the Canon EF lenses. So I would say this: if you want a camera with a bigger image sensor, which allows you to more easily get shallower depth of field and things like that, but also so that you can use Canon EF glass. Maybe you have a big collection of those lenses from your old days of shooting, I don't know, on the Canon 5D. Well, then in that case, I would say just get the Pocket 6K. If you have a lot of micro four thirds lenses, because you're a Canon, or a Panasonic GH5 or GH4 even user, then you probably want to go with the 4K, because again, they're both great cameras. So don't think of it as an upgrade. If you already have the Pocket 4K and you're happy with it and you have the full rig, you're not going to see that much of a difference with this one, again, because the resolution is not going to make that much of a big difference unless you're doing visual effects or a lot of reframing. But otherwise, yeah, I wouldn't even say you should think of it as upgrading. It's sort of more like, if you love the 4K and you want to have another camera like that, but that gives you the ability to use Canon EF lenses, then get the 6K. Otherwise, it's not really worth it. All right, now, next question. Do you think major TV networks and on-demand studios such as Netflix will accept shows filmed on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K? I mean, both of these cameras actually meet the specs that are listed by Netflix. Now, Netflix on their website still hasn't updated, simply because there's so many new cameras coming out, so they haven't updated their list of approved cameras, but they have like a general set of requirements. Camera has to be able to record natively in 4K or higher resolution, has to be able to record in RAW, like things like that they have. And yes, both of these cameras meet those specifications. So they, and if you're just wondering whether the quality of this camera, like the actual codec image quality, whether it's good enough to be shown on television or in a major motion picture, yes, definitely these cameras meet all the specifications. It really just comes down to, do you prefer the look of this camera versus the red camera or something like that, or some of the other options. Maybe you don't like the smaller form factor of this camera, things like that. But otherwise, when it comes to just purely the quality, it is definitely there. Like I said, after all, it's like a little miniature cinema camera that records in RAW. Next question, reliability wise, would you bring it on a professional camera shoot? If so, what codec and settings would you use? I have used the 4K already on a professional shoot, 6K not yet, just kind of my own test so far. And I shoot always in the Blackmagic RAW or B-RAW setting, because it's RAW. It gives me the capability to change settings afterwards. And also because if you adjust the recording ratio, and I'll tell you, I record like 80% of the time in 5:1 recording ratio. You can go to 3:1, but I almost don't see, like when I was doing tests personally, I don't see the difference in 3:1 to 5:1. Maybe in certain scenarios, if there's like some crazy amount of detail in your shot, maybe then, and if you're like punching in on your shot. But otherwise, I would say 5:1 is the way to go. Or if you're doing, and that's like for like the top of the line big projects that I'm shooting, even like films when I was working on with the 4K, that's what I used. But otherwise, I use even like 8:1 or 12:1. Again, it still looks beautiful. And the good thing about shooting B-RAW on these cameras is that whether you're shooting, like I said, in 5:1 or 8:1, the quality doesn't really seem to be diminished, but the file sizes and the data rate are substantially smaller. And it's actually you can actually get this to be smaller than Apple ProRes, which is amazing. So again, you're gonna have more recording media, you know, and more things that you can fit, more footage you can fit on there without having to also worry really about sacrificing the quality. All right, next question. How much time do you get on the SSD in some of the shooting formats? Well, let's see right now then. So let me actually jump right now, just format this SSD, actually this card here. Oh no, this is the T5 here. So I'll format that. I haven't really recorded anything here. All right, it's formatting, and I'm gonna just kind of go through the different settings, and we'll see how long it shows us that it can record for. And this is always dead on accurate. So right now I'm in a 6K, 3:1, so highest setting, and this is in 24 frames per second. And on the 500 gigabyte basically SSD that I have up here. So just keep that in mind. For all of this is going to be for 500 gigabytes. So on 500 gigabytes, you're going to get 32 minutes in 6K at the 3:1 compression ratio. If you go to constant quality, to Q0, it's also 32 minutes. Now, if you jump to 5:1 in 6K, but 5:1 compression ratio, suddenly you can get 53 minutes. Again, you're shooting in RAW 6K. If you go to 8:1, which again looks amazing, like you can shoot professional projects on 8:1, you're getting 85 minutes recording in 6K RAW. So pretty crazy. And then in 12:1 is 128 minutes. Now, what if I jump to, let's say, if I'm recording in 2.8K, or let's say 4K, because a lot of times people are recording in 4K. So 4K in ProRes then, HQ, I can record in up to 87 minutes. So 87 minutes. If I jump to ProRes LT, that's 187 minutes. So very, very high. And now if I jump to HD, and HD in ProRes LT is 792 minutes. So crazy amount of space. Now if I go to ProRes HQ, it's 373 minutes, so still a lot of stuff you can record. So now in Blackmagic RAW, but in 2.8K, and this is going to be in 3:1, you can record 155 minutes. 5:1, you can record 257 minutes. 8:1 compression is 410 minutes, and 12:1 it will give you 611 minutes. So definitely a lot of recording space with just that one SSD. All right, next question. Can you go wider with the Pocket 6K or Pocket 4K with the speed booster? I'm guessing you mean the field of view. And no, it's when you actually put the speed booster on this, if you saw my review of the Pocket 6K where I kind of compare, there's a section where I compare it to the 4K. With the speed booster on, this camera, the 4K is actually wider, or you could say kind of, you know, makes it look like you have a bigger image sensor. Than this. It's slightly wider. Obviously, without the speed booster, this one's going to be wider. All right, next question. Can you record 6K Q0 3:1 compression on the T5 without dropping frames? I kind of already talked about this, but now let's try it in just 24 frames per second. So I'll go here, Q0, 6K, and we are in 24 frames per second. And let's hit record. And it is recording, and I don't know, I think the data rate is actually smaller, significantly smaller when you're recording in 24 frames per second, so it shouldn't have any problems. But anyways, I'll leave this running and we'll see if it stops. All right, next question. Which one makes better coffee, 4K or 6K? I don't drink coffee, so I wouldn't know. All right, next question. Do you think there will be a B-RAW plugin for Final Cut Pro X? And how is the current workflow with B-RAW? So B-RAW or Blackmagic RAW, it works natively, obviously, in the DaVinci Resolve, which, by the way, and for those of you who are not aware, whether you buy the Pocket 4K or Pocket 6K, each time you buy this camera, you get a full license to the DaVinci Resolve Studio, the full software with unlimited updates, lifetime updates. So that's like a $300 value right there. And you watch my video where last year I switched from using Adobe Premiere to Final Cut Pro, then if you haven't seen it, watch it, because I might just convince you to switch to DaVinci Resolve. And this way, if you buy this camera, you get the software included. And it's an amazing software for editing now, but doing visual effects even, really good for sound, but amazing for color grading. I actually been using it for color grading for over 10 years, but only last year I switched to doing all of my editing exclusively in DaVinci Resolve. So in DaVinci Resolve, Blackmagic RAW works no problem, even from the 6K, because now with the latest update it just works. Now on the Adobe Premiere, you can edit Blackmagic RAW right there, and you can change all your settings, the RAW settings. You just have to get the Blackmagic RAW Studio, I believe it's called. It's a plugin when you buy that, and now they also released an update, so you can load in the 6K footage from the Pocket 6K, and you install the plugin and you import the BRAW files into Premiere, and it works no problem. In Final Cut Pro right now, as far as I know, there is no way of actually loading in the footage. Now, obviously, if you really are keen on editing in Final Cut Pro, you can take any of these cameras that shoot in Blackmagic RAW, and again, because they come with the full version of DaVinci Resolve, DaVinci Resolve lets you take all the footage, let's say, at the end of your day, and do batch processing, and it does it very well. And you can compress it to whether it's Apple ProRes or DNX HD or any other really format. So you can compress it to any other format, and then you can import, obviously, Apple ProRes into Final Cut Pro. All right, next question. Do you think anyone will develop a speed booster for the 6K? There definitely will not be a speed booster like the type that kind of like this adapter that you can easily put it on and take it off, like the ones that are available for the Pocket 4K. Simply because, again, the mount is much longer, so the flange distance doesn't allow you to do that. But there is a company up there, Lucas, I think something, it's from France, I think, or Italy, and somewhere from Europe. Anyways, they created this sort of like a speed booster for the Ursa Mini Pro before, and now they're working on one for the Pocket 6K. I believe they have a Kickstarter app, so you can go and spend your money there and hope that you get it soon. But basically, it's like a speed booster, but it's one that you kind of mount it, and I guess technically it's not permanent. You can remove it, but you mount it actually inside the camera. Personally, I would kind of say, first of all, unless you're really good with doing that kind of stuff and you're not afraid of damaging your sensor and definitely voiding your warranty, I would say, don't do that. Because like I said, there's always going to be risks whenever you're mounting things inside there very close to the sensor. So that's one thing. But also when it comes to the quality of that speed booster, I don't know whether it's good or not. So I'm not going to be vouching for it. If I have a chance to use that speed booster, then I definitely will. And so I can kind of show to you guys whether it's worth upgrading to it. But again, right now I can't recommend it. But yes, there is going to be a speed booster, looks like, at least for right now, developed by one company that will effectively convert the super 35mm image sensor and kind of mimic it so it looks like it's a full frame camera. All right, next question is the 6K more reliable than the Pocket 4K? No, I mean, they're pretty much the same camera. So 4K, by the way, is super reliable. Like I said, whether it's super hot weather, the sun, or it doesn't matter where you're shooting, or cold weather, or when I was shooting stuff like with it on the beach and we had dust and sand flying around, I had no problems. Yeah, the camera is rock solid. It's actually very strong body too. It's like this special type of like carbon fiber kind of induced plastic. So very sturdy build and everything. And yeah, I have had no reliability issues with any of the, I would say for the last like 3 years, with any of the Blackmagic cameras. I've used the Ursa Mini 4K, the original one, then the Ursa Mini 4.6K, then I used the Ursa Mini Pro, then now I've been using these Pocket cameras, and no problems with any of these cameras. And at the same time, I've actually heard from a friend of mine who he damaged his own 4K simply because he connected a wrong cable there for the power. So he actually burned the camera and he sent it to Blackmagic, and because it was still under warranty, Blackmagic still fixed the whole camera. Not only that, but but they did it in under a week. He basically got it back in, like, I think he said it was 6 business days. So he said it was really quick. He kind of sent it over the weekend, it got there, and by the following weekend he got it back. So really amazing service that Blackmagic has now, and the fact that they serviced this camera even though it was his fault, again, was really amazing. All right, next question. Is the Ursa Mini Pro better than the Pocket 6K? And yeah, that's the last question actually. And better, I guess it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're just going to look at image quality, I mean, if you think the higher resolution is better, then obviously this one has higher resolution. The other one, the Ursa Mini Pro, is 4.6K. So this one is better in terms of resolution. Ursa Mini Pro is better because it has a higher dynamic range. The colors are very similar and they're just as easy to grade on both cameras. And if, again, look at my cinema camera tests that I did where I compared this to the Ursa Mini Pro and even the Arri Alexa Mini and the Red camera. And you can see there that it performs amazingly well amongst all these cameras. So I think it's kind of hard to say, but if you're to ask me personally, I guess I would still say that simply because the dynamic range is slightly better, more pleasing on the Ursa Mini Pro, but it's a very small, insignificant difference. So like, you know, this thing also, if you just shot to something with this camera, it would look amazing. It's just Ursa Mini Pro will give you that a little bit extra. Technically, they're saying 2 extra stops of light. Now, when it comes to the size and the weight, I would say this one's better because the Ursa Mini Pro, first of all, requires much bigger batteries, draws more power than this camera, and it's just a bigger, heavier camera. This one is so small. If you pair it with a small lens, then that's a very big advantage. So it depends on what terms I guess you're wondering if this one is better, but I would say both the Ursa Mini Pro and this camera or the Pocket 4K, they're all great cameras. They all have their advantages and maybe disadvantages in certain aspects. Anyways, that's it for these questions, I guess. And also, yeah, just to answer your question about shooting in 6K Q0. Yes, you can see it's still recording. It's been, what, 9 minutes almost. So I've been recording without any problems to the Samsung SSD. So yeah, you can definitely do that. So I'll start recording here. Yeah, if you guys, I guess if you have any other questions that I still have not answered, then let me know again in the comment section below. Or even better, go to my website. Over there, I kind of, simply because YouTube filters a lot of comments. Some of them they don't even post publicly. I don't even know, like sometimes the YouTube algorithm is just, it's just beyond me. I have no idea what the hell it's doing, but it looks at like a totally normal comment that somebody left and it just deletes it or filters it out, so I can't see it unless I go through all these filtered comments. And if you know anything about YouTube, and if you've been following me, I've got a lot of videos, a lot of views I'm getting, but a lot of videos and a lot of questions on a lot of these videos, so I can't possibly go through all of my past videos. So that's why I always say best way to get in touch with me or ask me a question is through my website. You can either leave your question on the latest post on my website or go to the contact page on my website and just send me an email. And that's it. Otherwise, again, if you guys want to download all the raw test footage from this camera or the Pocket 4K, if you guys want to, like I said, download any of my other free downloads, whether it's some of the LUTs that I developed for the Pocket 4K and 6K, or there are so many cameras. Again, get all of that on my website, which is tomantosfilms.com. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Hey, it's Paul at focuspulling.com. This video has been a long time coming, for as long as we've been waiting for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K to arrive. But now that I've been using it for about a week, I've thrown together this complete guide to every feature and every menu item, combined with some visual samples and some review comments along the way. All the specs of this camera have been discussed ad nauseum in the months leading up to its release. So I'll be spending most of the time going into sort of the nitty-gritty and the details of how to actually use the thing. But some of the key features have included this big chunky grip. It does have a very wide berth and a gigantic touchscreen on the back. Include a full-sized HDMI output, a USB-C port for docking a solid-state drive for extra capacity, and an audio input that's XLR with phantom power. Over at focuspulling.com, what you're seeing here is something that I had thrown together in the weeks leading up to the release of the Blackmagic camera. And they were some answers to some niche and complicated technical questions that seemed unanswered from the typical vlogs and blogs, but I got the answers straight from Blackmagic, so it's something you might want to check out if you haven't seen yet for things less to do with performance and use and more with features. But to start things off here, I thought it'd be a good idea to just sort of give a peek at what this camera is capable of shooting, and then use that occasion by wandering around DC yesterday to sort of run the camera through some potential trouble spots that I imagined might occur because of my experience with the prior Pocket HD. And one of them was the so-called black holes that would show up in blown-out highlights. I've frozen there for a sec. At least they're not there, but the roll-off of highlights isn't very elegant, so that's something I'm going to keep my eye on. Stability is also a huge challenge because of the form factor. You don't have a third point of contact with any eyepiece, so you're kind of always holding it out in front of you. And in that regard, even with a stabilized lens with power OIS, I'm clearly struggling here, like this guy is. Life in DC. The next shot's going to show you indoors, and I'm going to calm down here for a second so you can hear the sound. So that's how it sounds recording from the internal mics. Actually a 4-mic array that's used for honing in on sounds, and it offers the option for tuning in post. But the preamps also for the internal recording of the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is vastly improved over the HD predecessor. Here we're getting ready for a rolling shutter test. Since this is not global shutter, the thing we always worry about is whether we get the wobble effect, and there's kind of no getting around it, so I'm freezing in 2 spots there, and particularly at the end you'll just see that is simply not the curvature of the back of any subway car, but it's the best it can do. This is 120 frames per second, but it's actually in windowed HD, so it's a 2 times crop factor from the already 2 times crop factor of the Micro Four Thirds sensor. And that said, it performs exceptionally well. These are the Kavanaugh protests at the Supreme Court. But I was really impressed with it, and I think it outpaces any other portable camera on the market for shooting slow motion. So after that brief teaser of video samples, time to at least preface this incredibly long video to say that it's much easier to navigate if you use the indexed hyperlinks in the caption below this video, so that you can skip around to the area that you're most interested in. There might be things you already know, and also there is a corresponding, even more interactive web version of this at focuspulling.com, where you can actually get discrete video screens for each of the sections. So it's really easier to navigate. But if you want to take the deep dive with me all the way to the end, we'll be seeing more visual samples along the way, a few exteriors, and then we'll wrap up by exploring the peculiar feature called dual native ISO. So what's the setup here for this guide? What we're actually doing is we're shooting using an A7 III, a Sony A7 III, onto the back panel of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. I'll just say Pocket 4K. But then look at what it's looking at. So then it's looking at the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, which is what it used to be called until this guy came along. Now I guess we could just call it the Pocket HD. So it's sort of a, I don't know, a farewell shot of the old standby that caused us so much grief, but still was such a revolution, and the Pocket 4K feels no less revolutionary. As I'm going through a lot of the menu options and pointing at things, I'll often be using this pen stylus just to get my fat fingers out of the way. But sometimes inevitably I will have to be sliding things around and touching the screen with my fingers. So you'll see this a lot. And then one more thing is that I do have an alternate view that I can always pull up. So I'll be oscillating back and forth, mostly staying in this view, but I'm also via the HDMI port on the left of the camera when you're looking from the back. It sends out a 1080p feed to, in this case, an Atomos Shogun, and I'm recording that with some of the overlays enabled. But the reason I even had to set things up this way with an actual view of the physical screen with all of its flaws, including a little bit of, I don't know what you could call it, electrical noise or jitters or strobing or something from shooting video. The reason I had to shoot it this way is because the HDMI output, though it is versatile in being able to customize what is overlaid and what is not overlaid, it can't send out a view of the menus. That's interesting because the Sony a7 III, for example, definitely can send out a view of the menus. And my last very long video, that was the complete walkthrough of the a7R III, certainly did that. I think that Blackmagic didn't see a point to that because there's no cursor and no visible navigation on the touchscreen menus for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, Pocket 4K. So since that's the case, we're having to go back and forth. Okay, cool. One more prologue to all of this before really getting to the heart of the matter, which is the menus themselves, is to walk around the screen and just to get familiar with what you see when you're typically shooting with a live view. And the value of that, too, is the fact that you might end up actually accessing, so to speak, menu items interface by tapping on the particular metadata that's visible. So starting from the top left and going clockwise, ignoring these frame guide and LUT icons that are just indicators, it turns out that you can tap most of these, and we can start by tapping this top left item, which is frames per second, FPS. And when I tap it with this, then it pulls up this little pop-out slider. And with the slider, I can either kind of change the value this way in big increments. And so you have the standard frame rates from hipster jittery, and then you can bump up to, and that's of course the cinema version. Then we have standard PAL, P-A-L in the European territories frame rate for broadcast. Then we have the US standard for broadcast. I don't need to show you all of them, but the native capabilities of this camera are kind of amazing. As we know, it can shoot up to 60p in full 4K resolution. So one more thing to note about this is that for all of these slider menus, there will also usually be these sort of cursor icons where you can just tap it once and move back. Over here, you have something that says off-speed frame rate. So it sounds a little tricky at first because it sounds as though you're basically saying, yeah, I'm changing the frame rate to something that's off the speed that I was using before, and that's that. But actually what it's really implying is that you can change the frame rate relative to the ultimate codec's playback resolution. So if the actual codec is meant to record in 29.97 frames per second, when I have it set to off-speed frame rate at 60, when it dumps it into the 30-ish frames per second, it'll look like 1/2 speed motion or slow motion. But you can more basically fine-tune, adjust these sorts of off-speed frame rates using this slider while recording into a set frame rate. We're getting to get into the more of the high frame rate, which actually has its own dedicated physical button over here a little later when we dig farther into the menus. But that option still is available to you right here as a slight variant on the ability to go slow motion, basically. So I'm going to turn that back off, and here we are back again at 29.97. When you get these little fly up from the bottom menus, you can tap anywhere else to kind of get out of them. It's an exit, if you will. Moving quickly along, then you have shutter speed, and sure enough, just like the other one, you can tap it and then get this interface here where you can basically proceed forward. And of course, according to the rules of physics and all cameras in the universe, the higher the shutter speed, it just cycled back, the darker it gets because it has less time to capture from all the photo sites, whatever image is presented to the camera sensor. So just a little review, of course. Why do we see 1/60? Well, it's because I actually changed from the default settings. I'm too stuck on the way I've always done things. There is a way by default, actually, that the camera tells you what the shutter speed is by presenting you with a shutter angle, it's called. And then most all of the time, any competent cinematographer, unless they have a really good reason, like 1% of the time during a film, they're going at 180 degrees for proper motion blur, whatever the frame rate is. And in this case, since my frame rate is basically 30 frames per second, the rule of this cinematographer's rule is that the denominator of the shutter speed needs to be double the frame rate. So the proper shutter speed for proper motion blur, for not looking like an amateur strobe GoPro video without proper ND filtration and so on, is to have it be 1/60th when you're shooting at the standard 30 frames per second. Again, non-hipster, non-jittery frame rate that I personally use for every project I've ever shot. So there we are. Iris, once again, you tap it and then you're presented with the ability down at the bottom to change the iris value. And here I am sort of closing down, making the aperture smaller with a higher number. Another universal law of physics in all cameras in the universe is that the higher the f number, the tinier the hole gets, and the tinier the hole gets, the darker it gets. This is the first place, though, where we're seeing something that is able to do something because of the fact that the camera is currently connected to an actual native micro four thirds lens with electronic contacts. And since it is able to control the aperture, then we can use the menu interfaces to do that. Point being, if you have a manual lens on, this will do nothing. So it's almost kind of disabled, if you will. You can consider it that way. One other thing that we'll explore really quick while we're on the subject of native lenses is that if you do have a lens that is native and therefore can do autofocusing, then sure enough, the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, the Pocket 4K, does have a very simple autofocus ability that might surprise you in terms of how often you'll use it, which I'll explain a little later. But in a nutshell, you can tap anywhere on the viewfinder screen, and then at that spot, within a certain sort of fudge factor, it will rack to that focus area. But it looks ugly as shit. So when you do it, you'll see that it kind of goes in and out. Now that isn't new because, like, let's say, for example, any smartphone that has an autofocus function with moving lens elements still has that sort of ugly motion. But, some cameras don't. I'm going to go back again and you'll see it bounce back in and out when it racks onto the original Pocket HD. The Sony a7 III that I'm shooting with right now, it's in manual right now. But when I fly on a gimbal, the a7 III just totally rocks. It's the best camera on the market right now in terms of always magically nailing focus. And it does so in a way that doesn't bounce back and forth like that. You can even change in the settings the racking speed. You can make it really slow and elegant. So, boo-hoo, but then again, there's a sort of conceit with anybody who owns a Blackmagic product that you would never use autofocus. So, sorta, but maybe not. But what we can say about it is that it can be a handy tool when you need to tap somewhere on the screen. Incidentally, you can even see how it is precise enough to even see the distinction at this pretty wide aperture. I'm at f2.4. That means that this is out of focus and therefore the focus peaking. In other words, the little red sprinkles, they aren't showing up down here on the lettering, but if I tap it, it really nailed focus down there to the detriment of this up here, which is just literally an inch farther back from this precise prime focal length. Right now I have a 25 millimeter f1.7 native Panasonic lens on the Pocket. So that's an explanation of how focusing works. And when you're flying on a gimbal, and you, of course, don't have any ability to have continuous autofocus track objects, and you certainly don't have any remote control capability, then you might be surprised at how handy it is to be able to just tap the screen to nail focus, at least at the current focal length that you're shooting at while you're flying on a gimbal. Similar to that in general, just another insight is that the value of us right now going through all of these and the value altogether of being able to access some settings here instead of using the hard buttons over on the top here or on the sides here or in the menu itself, which was the meat of the video we're finally getting to after a few minutes, is that it doesn't shake the camera. So you can imagine when you're flying on a gimbal and the motors are fighting against gravity and fighting against motion, to be able to tap this stuff lightly and to pull up a menu and to be able to change settings and to grab focus this way and to change ISO values, which we're getting to in a second, without pushing hard physical buttons or moving around a dial is extremely valuable, especially when you have non-stabilized lenses. And again, while you're flying on a gimbal where the motors would just freak out if you did that. So that's awesome. And in fact, many DSLR cameras on the market that are more consumery, they certainly don't have that capability. So don't underestimate the value of just going straight to functions. But speaking of functions and having gloated about how great it is, this one you're probably not going to use much. This actually toggles when you touch it between time code that's relative to HDMI clock versus natural clock, which is to say physical clock, world clock. And then there's also a mode that just starts counting up based on how much you've recorded. I'm just leaving it at defaults, and I never really look at that, but it's something you might care to be able to toggle between. I doubt. ISO, when you tap it, here we are. Oops, I actually autofocused because I didn't hit it. We are back in the same interface where you can actually either, with a single tap, go forward to the next natural ISO value, or you can, again, drag the slider, which bumps by big values. So it doesn't go in small increments, unfortunately. As to ISO, we'll definitely be spending some meaningful time exploring one of the camera's coolest features that was previously seen at the consumer level on the GH5S, which is dual native ISO. Just a preview of that is that the nutshell is that once you get to 1000, the noise floor is actually getting pretty high. Now, granted, I would be adjusting other things like aperture and so on, but the noise floor is high here compared to when I go to 1250, the noise floor bumps down. And the reason that it bumps down is because of the fact that it's activating a completely separate, if you will, electrical circuit. It's not quite engineering accurate way to describe it, but it's as if you're using another sensor. That's why they say dual native ISOs. And by accessing the higher ISO sensor and being at that low of the high sensors, 3200 native ISO, at 1250, the noise floor becomes very low. So the lesson will be, when we talk more about this, that you probably are going to end up shooting most of your projects starting at 1250, but we'll get there. And that's to say for the maximum dynamic range possible. But I'm going to go back down to 200 since, and I'm going to get my focus back again by tapping on the camera. Okay, next up, over to here we have white balance, and when I tap it, we get a little bit more of a menu to pop up. And what we're actually getting here is a few different icons that are the familiar pictorial icons that you see on a typical consumer camera. And we have sunshine, we have light bulb, which is to say incandescent or tungsten, we have fluorescent, we have rainy day, which is to say overcast, this is mirror clouds. What you see activated right now is CWB, which stands for constant white balance, but this is going to be a little different in terms of the way it behaves compared to DSLRs. Constant white balance doesn't quite mean that we have chosen one of these or not, and it also doesn't mean that you've chosen any specific Kelvin value. It simply means that you're in a non-sort of standard mode. So anything that isn't currently one of these, this is the place where you're always going to end back up again with a specific value. And by that I mean you can simply adjust the Kelvin values by pretty small increments so that your white balance varies that way. I picked 4800K because that looked about right given this mixed color temperature environment. The back panel display is very blue compared to the other even indoor lighting. This is a tint adjustment that's sort of a fine-tuning, if you will, so you can see how that operates independently of the Kelvin value. And then one more important thing to note about the white balance feature is that when I go to what's called AWB, what we're accustomed to when we see AWB is continuous white balance, so that as I turn my camera, let's say from a window to an indoor light, that it would auto-adjust. This camera is not capable of that, so it's very analogous to the autofocus limitation that we ran into earlier, where I can't do it continuously. What auto white balance actually means is that it's grabbing white balance. So when I tap it, I go into a new mode that gives me a fairly tolerant box. And at the box, I could, and I'm just going to do this roughly, I don't have a proper white card, or gray card as is best, but let's just throw something here. And then when I confirm update white balance, then it grabbed white balance from my white card. And then when I go back here, we'll see that it actually assigned a value that feels to me a little bit off. It's 5050 Kelvin. And 5050 Kelvin is maybe a little bit too warm, and warm meaning lower Kelvin than I wanted. So I think, where was I before? Some radically different value, like 58, wasn't I, or something? I can't quite recall. I think I was at 5800 Kelvin. But, and and then I think I was over here at 15. So it grabbed its best approximation, but again, I didn't use a proper gray car, and it wasn't pulled correctly. But you can see how auto white balance is not truly auto, but it's rather being able to pull white balance from an unfortunately non-movable centered white balance pull. So there's white balance. That'll save us some time when we get to the menu, and we're almost there. Tint is that number we saw over here. Okay, on the top right, that's indicating right now, as you could clearly tell, when it says AC, that means alternating current, which is to say it's plugged into the wall. In the US, we use alternating current at 60 hertz, 120 volts. The Pocket 4K comes with adapters for European territories too, and then the power supply auto adjusts. But the key here is that it also doubles as a battery indicator if you are running off of battery. So I'm going to, with some risk here, since it'll shake things, I'm going to go ahead and unplug the power from the Pocket 4K. And then we'll see the icon change, and this introduces a sad fact about the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. And the sad fact is the fact that it's just universally inaccurate. There is never any way to get a good read on this under all circumstances. One circumstance is that you could be using the battery that came with the Pocket, and then it says 0% for some reason, and it doesn't even give you an accurate reading, even though this is a full at 100%. The other one is that it won't show you the percentage value, but it'll give you sort of a bar reading. That's another type of LPE6 camera. That was the DSTEs, I think, that I tried. And then if you use a native Canon battery, there's anecdotal reports that that's the best in terms of giving you a proper percentage and so on. But even then, after a certain point, it just completely falls off the map. There comes a point where it just shuts down quickly. So I'm going to plug this back in, and then we'll see the icon change once again. This is always a little tricky because of the proprietary 2-button LEMO connector that Blackmagic used. LEMO-like connector, they emphasize. It's not actually LEMO. So now we see it says AC again. And then also what showed up, if you look real close, you can see a little lightning bolt. The lightning bolt signifies that during the time, of course, when I had it unplugged, it was using battery power. So it's now charging the battery, and it'll only take a couple minutes until it's back to full charge. So when you see AC plus the charge symbol, it means it's plugged into a wall outlet and then charging via AC. Fun side note, when you connect a USB-C cable, you can recharge the battery, but you absolutely cannot run off of USB-C because it's a 5-volt feed by default. I've suggested to Blackmagic and hope they take into account the ability of USB-C power delivery, or PD, to be able to increase the voltage to proper amounts that would run the battery during shooting. But they haven't implemented that, and maybe they won't ever. But anyways, this is I'm making a rigging video later on to follow up the viral Pocket HD rigging video that I made some years ago, and that'll be in the next few months once I gather up all the accessories. So there's our power indicator. Okay, down here we get into audio. And again, for each of these features, going to go all the way for however many hours or minutes it takes. But this is a way to see what's possible when we access things from the menu. And coming to the VU meters, I call them VU meters when I say audio. This actually disappears pretty quickly, but and there it went. But when we get here, it turns out right now that the left and right channels, which is to say channel 1 and channel 2, are ganged. They move together. The reason for that is the setup for this is that right now I'm talking into the Pocket 4K's mini XLR port, and it's sending phantom power to a top quality Sennheiser shotgun microphone. And that shotgun microphone is then being recorded into the Shogun. It's kind of complicated, but you're getting a good estimation of the preamp quality via the XLR port. And so since I'm feeding the monaural XLR, XLR input to both the left and right, or channel 1 and channel 2, then naturally they need to move together, because there's no point in changing the balance left to right if I'm recording a monaural source. So that's what's going on there. And I'm going to go back to my 75-ish value. Cool. And then this down here is just speaker and or headphones, which is not relevant right now. So exiting out of there. Here we are now at, turns out I've talked about how all of these sort of ways to access menu items or parameter settings from the native or the sort of base touchscreen view, the live view, is sort of running in parallel to other ways to get there, such as the hard buttons, the dial, the top buttons, and then the menu itself accessible here. There is one option on the whole camera that as far as I could tell, where you actually have to touch only this to be able to get there. And so let's do it, and then it'll become clear what we're talking about when we get there. And sure enough, here's the interface where you can access the 2 card slots. On the left side, you access the CFast 2.0 card. I don't have any plans to buy a CFast 2.0 card. They're both low capacity and terribly overpriced because there's just simply no demand for it to scale the prices down. The SD card slot is on the right, and I'll be using SD cards some of the time. But the great killer app of this whole Pocket 4K workflow is the USB-C port on the side, being able to connect to an extremely cheap solid-state drive via USB-C at reasonable bit rates that can handle all of the speeds, the recording bit rates of the camera. So CFast 2.0 would have an interface here if there were a card connected that's the same as this. But let's go down what we see here. And the card is empty, and it tells you, based on the current codec and frame rate and resolution, how much would be left. But what I really want to hone in on here, and this isn't even going to come up, so we're getting it out of the way now in the menus because you can't get here through the menus. Again, only through the main live view. Once we get here, we're told that the format is currently exFAT. It's important to kind of distinguish between that and the option you have for formatting in what they call Mac OS X, which actually translates technically into HFS Plus. And the thing about HFS Plus, I'm going to show you that when I click the Format SD card item, and then it pulls up to the option where I could have chosen that. If I did choose to format in this, there's one problem with that. I cannot mount that on any operating system besides OS X, a Mac basically. So for maximum compatibility, exFAT is the way to go. Why? Because exFAT is a sort of non-proprietary storage format, which can be mounted on both a Windows and a Mac. So this is extremely important when you change manufacturers of your PC, but also you're collaborating with other people and you want the lowest common denominator. What do you lose? Hardly anything. There's anecdotal evidence as well as Blackmagic claims that when you save to HFS Plus format, it's a safer environment when it comes to things like corruption and that sort of thing, file recovery. I think it's possible that it stores a little bit more metadata, but exFAT is simply the way to go. So rest assured, or I should just simply assure myself, I am feeling safe to format this now, but always take care. It does ask you one last time when you click this, are you sure you want to nuke all this stuff? I say yes. Funny quirk. Turns out that there's no way to change this. It'll always be actually an interesting sort of, I don't know, history scribe feature of the camera that it'll always count up. So it's going to rename my card to A007, and the next time I format, next number up. So I've got a ways to go in the hopeful long life of this camera. Why am I saying all this? Here's the main theme. The main theme that also is sort of anecdotally mentioned is the fact that formatting a flash memory in the camera, using the camera's own operating system, is a better thing in 2 categories of performance. One is the degradation of speed over time that flash memory tends to do, because flash memory actually has its own circuits that reallocate memory space after the inevitable